Mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue et merci d'être venus si nombreux à ce banquet de l'Institut Macdonald-Laurier pour célébrer le 150e anniversaire de la Confédération canadienne. Je m'appelle Brian Lee Crowley et je suis le directeur général de l'Institut. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MLI's celebration of Canada's 150th birthday year. I'm Brian Lee Crowley, and I'm the managing director of the Institute. I've got a few things I'm going to say, and in the meantime, please feel free to get started on your salad. Don't wait. Our sesquicentennial year is a wonderful time to celebrate what's great about Canada. And indeed, MLI is dedicated to the proposition that Canada is a country well worth celebrating, as anyone who looks at conditions in other countries can quickly see. But what exactly is it that makes Canada great? Everybody has a country, but Syrians or Burmese or Iranians or Nigerians or Ukrainians do not have the same reasons to celebrate that we do. Everybody has a national day, but some people live in fear of their government, which tends rather to dampen their patriotic ardor. Democracy is certainly part of why we want to celebrate Canada, but it's actually a far smaller part of what makes this country great than most people imagine. From time to time, crazy people in faraway places have risen to power through ostensibly democratic institutions. Dictators have often used the form of democracy to legitimize their rule after democracy's precious essence has long since expired. It cannot be diversity that we celebrate, at least not in its risible institutional form. The USSR was home to a huge ethnic diversity, but its people had to be prevented from leaving at gunpoint. And in any case, I would want to argue that diversity is not the cause of Canada's greatness. Diversity is not the cause of Canada's greatness. Diversity is one of its effects. Diversity is one of the effects of greatness. People come here because of who we are, not because some other people came before them. They are all here for the same reason, in my view, and that's not it. Free health care or unemployment insurance can't be the answer. Canada was a desirable place before those relatively recent innovations. Just as there are societies with more developed social programs, yet Canadians do not aspire to move there, whereas people from there aspire to move here. When my ancestors, Lawrence and Honora Crowley, set sail from County Cork in Ireland in the 1820s, never again to see the land of their birth, to come to what was to become Canada, they didn't come seeking free visits to the doctor's office. They didn't come and settle in the wilderness and clear away the forest to create a prosperous farm, still owned by Crowleys today, 5 generations later, by the way, to found a prosperous farm and creamery and cheese factory for the quality of the public schools and other services. There weren't any. There weren't any. And yet Lawrence and Honora and millions of others flocked to Canada. Why? Why? Because there is something about Canada that doesn't just make it a pleasant place to live with good public services and people from many countries. It's one of a handful of societies that the rest of the world looks on in envy. If we open the doors to this country tomorrow, the torrent of humanity that would sweep in would be beyond imagining. As a politician I heard once say, this place would look like Walmart on a Saturday morning. Let me suggest that there are three things. There are three things that make Canada a great nation, and a nation worth celebrating. The first is that, like America and Australia, we are a creature of the New World. We are not an ancient civilization like Europe or the Middle East or China. We have escaped much of the prejudice and many of these social and cultural barriers that disfigure the old world. Our life prospects are not determined by our religion, our ethnicity, our accent, our caste, our party membership, or our social class. That doesn't mean that people don't fail in Canada, that they don't fail to realize their dreams. They do. It doesn't mean that poverty doesn't exist. It does. It means that the barriers that I've described are not impermeable here as they are in many other societies. Yes, there has been prejudice. Lawrence and Honora suffered from the prejudice against the Irish Catholics common in the 19th century. And it cannot have been easy to be native Irish speakers who were, in Honora's case, according to the census of Canada West of 1926, to be illiterate. But that prejudice has been overcome, and we have worked successfully to defeat many other such prejudices over this country's history. Some remain. Some remain. The disgraceful plight of many Indigenous people in Canada, for instance, tells us that there is still work to be done. But the fact that there is work still to be done, ladies and gentlemen, does not negate what we have accomplished. People come to Canada. People come to Canada so that the sum of their life choices is not determined at their birth. People born here literally cannot imagine what that's like. And so don't appreciate how rare an achievement it is. But those who come here from other places, they know, and often make great sacrifices so that their children will never know a society where your fate is sealed before you take your first breath. That reminds us that what makes Canada great is not, say, multiculturalism, although there's nothing wrong with multiculturalism, but as Sir Wilfrid Laurier said in his great speech on the admission of Alberta into the Dominion, it's fine to celebrate where your parents came from and the traditions that they brought with them. But surely what matters most of all is how we work together here, not looking backward at what we were, at our different origins, at our diverse points of departure, but looking forward together to what we are becoming and creating a better country here for our children, all of whom are Canadian. The second thing that makes Canada great is freedom. Again, to cite Sir Wilfrid, Canada is free, and freedom is her nationality, he said. And in so doing, he encapsulated the great tradition of freedom which has been bequeathed to us, a tradition that finds its roots in British liberalism, but whose benefits have been conferred on every Canadian, regardless of their ethnic origin, their language, or their religion. Too many people somehow believe that freedom was introduced into Canada by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But that charter is such an important document because it codifies part of a tradition that reaches back deep into our colonial past and beyond it to the common law, Sir Edward Coke, the Glorious Revolution, and the Magna Carta. A tradition of freedom that drew Lawrence and Honora across the Atlantic with barely the clothes on their back, knowing almost nothing of how they would make their living here, but knowing that energy and commitment and hard work would be rewarded and you would be entitled to keep the fruits of your labor. And that freedom includes, by the way, institutions that most of the world has still not mastered. Things like the rule of law, non-corrupt judges and police, reasonably speedy and predictable resolution of disputes, moderate levels of taxation, stability of property and its transference by consent, the certainty that defeated governments will leave office and that elections actually choose governments. Added to the civil freedoms of speech and religion and conscience and assembly, this makes an inheritance of freedom almost without peer in the world. And those who look in vain for the Canadian mainstream, for the Canadian values that unite us, have not looked here, or they would understand their error. Freedom plus the New World together make a society in which each of us has been given more latitude to shape our lives according to our individual beliefs and desires than anywhere else on the face of the earth. Finally, what makes Canada great is our willingness to sacrifice to protect this precious and rare inheritance. When Lawrence and Honora arrived, they could not have known that their grandson, my grandfather, Lee, whose name I proudly bear, would fight in the Great War, or that his son, my father, Lawrence, named for that first Lawrence to arrive on our shores, would serve in both the Second World War and Korea. Whether facing down Nazism or communism or Salafi jihadism, whether in Korea, in Kosovo, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, or now in Latvia, Canadians have always been willing to put everything on the line so that the things we most value will be protected at home and abroad. Because, as Tommy Douglas so sagely observed, what we want for ourselves, we desire for all. The willingness to sacrifice in order to protect the freedoms uniquely available to us in the New World. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a country worth celebrating. But perhaps this is an old-fashioned and historically ignorant kind of patriotism of a now unfashionable kind. According to Samuel Johnson, you will know, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. And if the views of Canada's young people, as revealed in a recent Angus Reid poll, are anything to go by, they largely agree with Johnson. As Angus Reid notes, quote, massive generational differences affect Canadians' sense of pride and attachment to their country. Nearly 3/4 of those 65 years or older profess a, quote, deep attachment to Canada. And this shrinks to less than half amongst those aged 18 to 24. And Angus Reid further points out that in the recent past, ambivalent or negative sentiment about Canada was concentrated in Quebec. Differences among Canadians on this question were therefore chiefly regional. Today, it is the young across the country who are far more conditional in their enthusiasm for Canada than their elders. If this is just a new manifestation of the old phenomenon of idealistic youth versus worldly wise experience, it's perhaps nothing to worry about. If, by contrast, it portends a long-term shift in Canadians' commitment to Canada, I think it would not just be a pity, but it would be a loss to the world and to Canada. In a way, I'm not surprised that young Canadians view Canada with some suspicion. Talk to many of them and you may be, as I sometimes am, a bit dismayed by how little they know about our country and how it came to be and what it represents. Equally, much of what they have been taught in the schools is that our past is nothing but a repository for all that is retrograde and shameful. It is filled with racism, sexism, homophobia, colonialism, militarism, genocide, and environmental destruction. It's easy to criticize the past and the decisions made there, but it is a conceit of each and every generation to believe that they alone are free from poor judgments and intellectual shortcomings and historical myopia. Looking solely at our past errors is not the right standard by which to measure Canada and its great achievements. Remember that poverty, squalor, filth, disease, and intolerance have together been humanity's lot since the beginning of time. Taken together, they are not the exception. They are the default condition of humanity. Only a handful of societies in the world have figured out, slowly and painfully, the institutions and behaviors that allow people to escape these ills. Canada is at the forefront of those nations, and it is thanks to our history of struggle against the worst human afflictions that we now enjoy the conditions where our young people can look back in horror at how things used to be. It is the progress made possible by the economic, social, and yes, the moral advances of our forebears that have allowed us to enjoy peace, order, and good government in generous measure. As the head of an institution that bears the name of our two greatest founding prime ministers, and at a dinner celebrating 150 years of Confederation, I cannot help but observe that Confederation itself was no exercise in crude majoritarian triumphalism, but was an exquisitely wrought compromise between contending cultures, languages, and religions that has made us one of the longest enduring political orders on the planet. We have constantly expanded our notion of rights in response to genuine wrongs and real grievances. Canadian blood and treasure have been expended in righteous struggles like World War II and Korea because when the world called, Canada was not found wanting. As we have become wealthier, we have worked to improve our environment, our education, and our social supports. It appears that this generation is the one called upon to right the many wrongs done to Aboriginal peoples in our history. And in mentioning this, I would be most remiss if I did not acknowledge that we are honored this evening to be on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. We cannot change the past, but it does not require us to despise our past, to say that our job is to make sure that past mistakes shall not be tolerated on our watch. Like all real virtues, as Aristotle taught us, true patriotism is a midpoint between two extremes. On the one hand is narrow, bellicose, xenophobic nationalism, of which we have perhaps seen all too much in recent times. On the other hand is a bloodless, rootless cosmopolitanism that loves an abstract humanity, but never any actual flawed community of real people. True patriots love Canada because it has made us, including those who have come to join us from other countries, who we are. And who we are, for all our flaws, is a standard to which much of the rest of the world aspires, and with very good reason. I would ask you now to rise and join Lindsay Alexander White in the singing of O Canada.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons command, car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Now it's my great pleasure to invite up on stage to join me my co-host for this evening's event, Raven Smith. Raven, will you please come up? As those of you who have attended our events in the past know, it's always one of my pleasures to use these events to give profile and recognition to the rising generation of leadership in our country. And this year we have chosen Raven for reasons you will easily understand when you learn a little about her. Raven is from the Carcross-Tagish First Nation, from the spectacular Southern Lakes in Yukon. She is a BA, MBA, and a BA, MA, and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. She's an advocate for Aboriginal economic development and entrepreneurship, and she doesn't just talk a good game, she is herself a successful entrepreneur working in the high-tech sector in both Canada and the United States. Raven is someone all of us will be hearing much more from and about in the years to come. Raven, please join me and introduce the many dignitaries who are in the audience tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Everyone, I'd ask you to hold your applause because we have a wonderful list of dignitaries this evening until I get through all the names. Ambassador Gita Kalmet of Estonia. Hard to do that. Ambassador Kenjiro Monji of Japan and his wife Etsuko. Representative Chung Chen Kung of Taiwan and his wife Mrs. Kung. Tom Berry, Deputy High Commissioner, United Kingdom. Lukasz Weremiuk, Charge d'Affaires, Embassy of Poland, and his wife Alicia. Mark Dayton's First Secretary, Foreign Affairs, Latvia. Marco Mendocino, Liberal MP, Eglinton Lawrence. Faisal El-Khoury, Liberal MP, Laval, Quebec. Greg Fergus, Liberal MP, Dollard des Ormeaux, Quebec. Seamus O'Regan, Liberal MP, Mount Pearl, Newfoundland, Labrador. Sean Casey, Liberal MP, Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. Roger Kuzner, Liberal MP, Cape Breton, Canso, Nova Scotia. Sylvie Boucher, PC MP, Charlevoix, Quebec. Lisa MacLeod, PC MPP, Nepean Carleton. Irwin Cotler, former Justice Minister and Attorney General of Canada. Peter Milliken, former Speaker, House of Commons, 2001 to 2011. Marjorie Le Breton, former government leader in the Senate. Matthew Boyce, Minister Counselor for Political Affairs, U.S. Embassy. Kent MacDonald, President and Vice Chancellor of St. FX University, Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Mary DeToro, President of the Monarchist League of Canada, Ottawa branch. Kay Stanley, Member of the Board, National Capital Commission. Messieurs Vaughn McClellan and Pierre Casgrain, members of the board, and incoming member Vijay Sapani from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.
Big hand for all our dignitaries, please. And now it's my pleasure to acknowledge those sponsors without whose support this evening's festivities would not have been possible. Lockheed Martin, Canadian Wireless and Telecommunications Association, iPolitics, the Canadian Museum of History, Canadian Gas Association, Tech Resources, Innovative Medicines Canada, the Modern Miracle Network, Spirits Canada, and I Am Gold. Thank you to all our sponsors, and we'll be talking about them again later in the program. Speaking of the Museum of History, I want to invite Mark O'Neill, the President and CEO of the Federal Crown Corporation that operates the Canadian Museum of History and the Canadian War Museum, who will say a word of welcome on behalf of the museum. I know, though, that Mark will forgive me if, before I ask him to take the podium, if I can take a moment to acknowledge one of his guests at the museum's table this evening, Mr. Douglas Cardinal. The brilliant architect in whose stunning creation we have had the good fortune to hold our dinner in each of the past 3 years. Please stand up. Back to Mark O'Neill. A native of Toronto, Mark grew up in Ottawa and attended Carleton University, where he studied political science and Canadian studies. He's a community volunteer and was presented with the Mayor's City Builder Award in 2013 for his outstanding community service and public advocacy. Mark.
Thank you very much, Brian. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les députés distingués, convives, bonsoir. Soyez les bienvenus au Musée canadien de l'Histoire. Je remercie Brian de m'avoir invité à vous adresser brièvement la parole à l'occasion de ce gala qui, cette année, souligne le 150e anniversaire de la Confederation canadienne, and I'm so glad that you took the time to acknowledge Douglas Cardinal here this evening. His vision is all around you, and also Dr. George Macdonald, the original CEO of this museum when it opened in 1989, and we're delighted to have you all here this evening. Brian and the MLI are very good partners of this museum. The theme of this year's gala, Confederation and a Celebration of Canada, is a fitting way to help mark this country's sesquicentennial year. And I cannot think of a more fitting venue than right here in the Grand Hall of Canada's National Museum of Human History. Notre institution joue un rôle de premier plan dans cette commémoration. Déjà en 2014, nous avons lancé un programme d'activités pour souligner le 150e anniversaire en présentant l'exposition 1867, Rébellion et Confédération, qui portait sur les 3 intenses décennies ayant précédé cet événement fondamental. Après avoir connu un vif succès ici au musée, l'exposition a fait l'objet de plusieurs versions itinérantes et sera présentée un peu partout au pays. But the jewel in the crown of our commemorative programming will officially launch on July 1st with the opening of the new Canadian History Hall, several stories above you in this museum. This signature exhibition at 40,000 square feet in 3 galleries on 2 levels will be the largest, most comprehensive and engaging exhibition ever created on our nation's story. The hall unapologetically explores all of our history, from Indigenous identities and perspectives to our colonial past and who we are today in the world. This is the first time our museum has truly explored our history in all of its dimensions, from celebratory milestones, yes, but to a number of darker chapters as well, which must be told. This new signature exhibition illuminates the enduring legacy of Canada's past, a legacy that is alive, relevant, and continually unfolding in the Canada that we know today. Lorsque le Sénat inauguré le 1er juillet, jour de la fête du Canada, la salle de l'histoire canadienne deviendra la destination de prédilection de tous ceux qui voudront découvrir l'histoire de notre pays. J'espère que vous serez des nôtres lors de l'ouverture officielle de cette nouvelle salle. Merci, thank you, Megwitch, enjoy your evening. Thank you, Brian.
Merci bien, Marc. Ça nous fait toujours plaisir d'être ici au musée. Just before I ask Relitsa Cholikova up on stage to entertain you, please let me take a moment and explain how the rest of the evening will unfold. After Relitsa plays for you, you will be free to enjoy the company of your table companions until dessert is served. And once that is done, we will call up the panel that is at the center of tonight's program. The panel discussion will go on for roughly 30 minutes, after which we will wrap up the evening. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend, distinguished international solo concert violinist and Ottawa cultural celebrity, Ralitza Cholokova, qui va nous jouer un morceau d'André Gagnon qui s'appelle Le Petit Concerto. She's going to play for us a piece by André Gagnon called The Petit Concerto. Before she does, though, let me mention that Ralitza's next major concert here in Ottawa will be the Women of Note concert, sponsored by the European Union and a number of European embassies here at the Museum of History. On March 10th at 7 p.m., come and celebrate International Women's Day with a concert of music by distinguished European women composers, performed by Ralitza and a number of her colleagues. Ralitza, please join us on the stage. Ralitza Cholokova, ladies and gentlemen, and you'll find a card in your menu giving details of her concert here at the museum on March 10th. Enjoy your dinner, and we'll be back in a little while with the panel. Thank you so much.